Welcome back to the EPS podcast where everything is a primary source. I'm Eric Paul. This is the second of a series of summer shorts that were recorded live at the Children's Museum of New Hampshire in Dover during the 2022 Makers Fest. I invited other makers as well as passersby to stop my table and chat about, well, anything and everything. One such visitor who stopped for an impromptu conversation was Darren Windham, who is the economic developer for the Town of Exeter, New Hampshire. We had a very nice chat about how craft breweries have really come into their own in the last few decades, elevating their status in society and local economies. Take a listen. All right, and we're back, and I am with
Darren Windham.
Darren Windham, and you are the economic developer for Exeter, you say?
Yes, sir.
And we were going over my table of stuff here at the Makers Fest in Dover, New Hampshire, at the Children's Museum, and what caught your eye is one of, actually I have several on my board here, of different craft beer places. And I am a big fan of those, as my physique will demonstrate. But you said as an economic developer that it's very important, right?
Yeah, it's an industry that has shown over the past 20 years at least how it can create vibrancy in communities, create jobs, and it's certainly done that in the New England states.
Yeah.
Not all states, but it's grown in New Hampshire for sure, and Exeter now has, I think, 4 breweries.
So I was actually talking to somebody recently about that, and in Maine, just over the border, and he was saying that there's like an exorbitant amount of craft beer places in Maine. Maine has a tiny population, just like New Hampshire, but there's like all these craft beer places. Do you see an end in sight? I mean, do you think they're just going to keep growing and growing?
Well, I think what you're seeing now is, this is just me saying this, and I'm not 100% sure, I'm sure, but this, anecdotally what I see is that what used to happen was breweries would grow, and then they would get swallowed by, large conglomerates, the Millers and the Budweisers, those type of things. They would buy it, and of course they wouldn't change the name of the brewery. It still looked like it was a small brewery. But what's happening now is breweries are moving to more of a local. They're sort of really keying in on their own market, and they're selling kegs of beer, but they're selling it to the local market. They're finding that as they start to try to grow and go further and further away, a lot of breweries aren't making it. It's just not what they're doing. And obviously they've shifted to the cans from the bottling for the most part. But the big thing that I think is such a big deal, your question here is what's the maker's role and status in society is, because they're local, because these people are in these communities, they are really catering to the culture.
Yeah.
They donate to little baseball teams and stuff like that. So they really care about where they are, and they get embedded, and it becomes part of the community.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I noticed about is that nobody's building bars anymore. For a long time that was like a business option. If somebody was interested in the service industry, food service and stuff, they'd build a bar.
Yep.
And I mean, it's all craft beer. And one of the things that made me fall in love with craft beer places is that the atmosphere, like you said, is very vibrant. It's also family friendly.
It is.
You don't feel like you're in a bar at all.
Absolutely
Even
right.
if they actually have a physical bar there, there's kids' games usually somewhere in the place, or if they have a big outdoor area, dogs are welcome in a lot of these places and things like that. So do you think that that's a reflection of the times that we're in right now, that nobody's building bars, but instead they're going to the brewery?
I think you're right. I think it's more of a community type thing. I think you can bring your family there. Look at Throwback in Northampton.
Yeah.
That's just an experience,
I love that place.
They have the outside, and they have the animals, and the hops they grow. So I think you're right. I think your regular like the 70s, 60s, 70s type bars where you had grumpy old men in them and stuff. I think that's sort of dead at this point.
And even like the sports bar seems to be.
True, yeah.
I mean, it's kind of reliant on the chains, like Buffalo Wild Wings or something like that, because they have, especially since people started cutting the cable, they're like, well, you can watch every game in the NFL season at our place.
Yep.
But again, locally, people aren't doing that for themselves. If they're going to get into any kind of business involving alcohol, it's the craft beer place for that reason. Now, I myself was kind of a anti-craft beer person for a long time.
Really?
I stuck to the traditional Bud, and I was a Budweiser guy all the way through, and it was going to the places in this area that I was like, oh,
the epiphany.
I was like, these are great because it costs a little bit more, it does cost, but it's handcrafted, right? There's a lot of, it's like that expertise is put into it, and the atmosphere is unbeatable. You just can't get that anywhere else. It's just like the rest of New Hampshire. It's very authentic and genuine.
I agree. What we haven't talked about in terms of craft beers is the tourism aspect of it.
Yeah.
Now it is big business now to go in Vermont, to go in Maine, to go in New Hampshire. They have a couple different. They have the buses that go between places, the oversized vans, if you will. But then they also have like the cards.
Yeah.
And my buddy and I used to live in Vermont, and we were insistent on getting every one of those things stamped. But it draws. It absolutely draws.
And it's a much different culture too, because when you think of like travel and alcohol, you're like, whoa, that's a terrible combination. But nobody goes to these places to get intoxicated.
Absolutely right.
You sip on the beer, you enjoy the live music, you get to chat with other people and just have great, and especially over the last 2 years. I mean, I started going to some Pipe Dreams out in Londonderry. We would do that on, in the summertime. We would like choose a town, and then see if they had any craft beer places, and go check them out. And some of them, I'm like, yep, you're fine. But then others I keep going back to because I love their atmosphere so much that I got to experience when everybody was outside all the time and everything like that. So would you say that the role and status in society we know that the craft beer places have increased, has that almost like a seesaw made for the big beer companies like the Budweisers to drop in their status overall, or would you?
I think that's the case. I think they're never going to go away.
Right.
They have a good business model, and it's a tried and true thing, and they're the big boys.
Yeah.
But I think believe it or not, the fastest growing beer in the country is Modelo, and so I tastes change.
Yeah.
But I think craft beer is here to stay, and I think the local portion of that. I think that the more local, the more regional, I guess, a craft brewery is. I just think they're going to do well. Sometimes you see these guys go under, and a lot of it is because I think that I could give a couple examples. I won't do that, but they don't have the funding. That they start a little too fast.
Yeah.
And I think, but if that's changed a little bit. I think some of these guys are like, okay, we're going to go at a snail's pace. We're going to, we're not going to go in and dump a bunch of money and get a bunch of investors. That's shown to fail. Like I said, I won't say them. You know who they are.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but I think what I'm seeing anyway, at least in my town and the rest of the Seacoast, it does seem that these guys. Don't forget they have that program at UNH.
Yep.
So the education around brewing beer has gone. It's just grown exponentially. And if you put that together with someone who has a little bit of business acumen, I think that I have friends that I have Vitamin C Brewing. One of my best friends was the head brewer there. He was one of the 4 people that started it. He has since sold his share. But for years, for 15, 20 years, he made beer at home. We were like, dude, you got to open a brewery. But he has a great job, family, and he did it totally on the side. Right. And I think a lot of these guys start that way. They start and they find some success. The Exeter Brewing guys, one guy is a stay-at-home consultant. He works for a company out of I think Washington State. The other guy's a pilot for I think JetBlue, and they have day jobs.
Yeah.
But on the side they make beer and they can't make enough of it. Every time it comes out, there's a run on it.
And it's funny because I mentioned I'm getting into it. I have my first batch.
Do you brew?
I just finished my first batch earlier this week, and it's fermenting in my garage right now. And,
I'll do the podcast again when you have one for me.
Right. Well, that's kind of my dream. I was telling my wife, I'm like, what I would love to do for a living is podcast and brew, and that's it. Just have all at home. And I mean, I think it could work. But when I was looking at recipes and things like that to try, there's so many of them that are like, compared to Budweiser, compared to Miller. And it's like, on the one hand, I'm like, well, why not just go out and buy that case of Budweiser, because they're not cheap to get the ingredients. But then I was like, well, wait a minute, part of it is that same reason why people have got into raising their own, livestock or making any other food thing, or
growing
any
own vegetables and making stuff
anything,
use their own ingredients.
Like what's going in there,
right?
And you have the control over it. You can switch up the and so we've kind of I think almost come like full circle when it comes to that, because 100 years ago that's how everybody made everything. You didn't have the supermarket prepackaged it all. And now we've almost gotten to be overload with that, so that here we are in the early 21st century, and we're like, no, I want to know what goes into there, and I want to also feel, proud of myself for making something that's.
And your customers too. I think a lot of people, they're savvy now, and they want to know, like the folks that got together for it's called the Three Rivers. It's a food exchange. I can't think of the name of it, but they go to all these farms and they bring the food together and stuff like that, and then people can go and get it from them.
Yeah.
Different restaurants or whoever, but people want to see locally sourced stuff.
Yeah.
And you like you say, you go to a town, you find the brewery, and you're assuming, I would think, that probably a lot of the stuff came from right around that town.
Yeah, they're not just cracking open a case in the back and pouring it into the giant vat to look like.
So what'd you make? Was it pale ale?
No, actually, I was talking to a gentleman that he runs his own. I'll plug it right now. The brew shop up in Shapley, Maine, and I told him exactly what I wanted to do. He's like, I got it. And he gave me a recipe for a Belgian wheat. He said, this for a beginner. Perfect, and he gave me all the ingredients, and he even made the adjustments to the recipe. He's like, I think you should do this, and I'm like,
great. Just
that alone told me that I'm like, I'm into the right thing, because I like being able to build things, or in this case my own podcast, and have my own way with it and stuff. So it was like, I'm hoping it comes out okay and I don't get discouraged. But even if I do,
Rome wasn't built in a day.
Exactly.
Man.
Everybody has to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And but it just matches the time period so well, because I think there's so many people, because we have the time and the resources to do it. We're like, well, especially the last 2 years, people are like, maybe I should do that thing that I never thought of doing before.
Absolutely.
And
I think that's a lot of that going on.
But the craft beer thing, I hope it doesn't fade away anytime soon, because I like everything about it, and I think it's very perfect reflection. 100 years from now, when people look back on this time period and they see that as one of the big things, big trends, they're like, yep, that says it all. Those people were kind of tired of the prepackaged everything.
I agree, and I'll tell you, where I live, it's changed our town. I've been in Exeter almost 8 years, and you could roll the streets up at say 6 o'clock at night, and we got Sea Dog. We landed Sea Dog, which was a big deal. I know that although they don't brew in Exeter, so that sort of got the demographic, the younger demographic coming out. Then we got the Thirsty Moose, and then this brewery started coming in. Sawbelly came in, Czars came in, Exeter Brewing. We're dancing with another one right now as we speak, and that is drawing a younger crowd to come to Exeter. I mean, obviously, you probably know this. We've landed Street, and a couple other things are opening in town. So it's becoming a foodie little town. But the breweries are a nice mix in there to draw the folks we're trying to draw.
It is, and Exeter being one of the 4 original towns of New Hampshire, 4 original colonies, it's not by any means the forgotten one, but it's because it's off the beaten path. I mean, you have Portsmouth, Dover, and Rochester up and down the Spalding.
Right.
So those are easy to kind of navigate through. Exeter is always the one that's like, oh, you have to drive out of your way to get to.
If you're up here, that's right.
So it's kind of an isolated, by comparison. I mean, as far as a small region like this can be isolated, it does take a little bit more effort to get to Exeter. And so I'll have to come back, because I remember a couple years ago we went down there, and I think the only option for craft beer was the Atlantic Sea Dog one.
Right, it was, and that's changed.
And so I'll be there soon to check out the.
So what's interesting about Exeter is we have a downtown.
Yeah.
And so we always did get the folks from Stratham, Brentwood, Kingston, those towns. But now we're starting to get a lot of other folks. We do get the Dover folks. We're getting people from Portsmouth. A lot of folks are saying they don't want to go to Portsmouth so much anymore because it's harder to park.
Yeah.
It's just a more sizable place. Obviously, Portsmouth is fantastic. I love it myself. But I think now you're seeing that, and I think that's part of the reason these breweries are going in and opening in Exeter, because they're saying that's a pretty good market. People can get here, they can park
get on the
here,
ground
we have our
level.
downtown. Yeah.
And you have the UFO festival coming back this year.
Festival, that's right.
And that's something else that gets people's interest to come by. If you can combine the two, somebody makes like a UFO. Actually, it is a brand of beer.
Yeah,
but,
it is a brand of beer.
Have them sponsor it, and you have the whole thing. But it's I'm glad to see, because this area does have a long history with brewing, particularly in Portsmouth with the Frank Jones Brewery. It was the biggest in the country for a while. So right around the turn of the century. But then it was brought down by two things. One, obviously, Prohibition, hit hard, and then the other was people's taste changed quite a bit, because what they brewed was more of an ale, more of an English style, dark, heavier drink. And then when troops were deployed overseas to Germany, they got a taste for pilsners and lagers, and that. So
I had no idea
that really changed the taste palette of American beer drinkers and stuff. And so, actually, at the same shop that I bought all my ingredients for my first brew, he was selling a brand of beer called Utica Club, and they have right on their packaging, the first beer to be reintroduced after Prohibition.
No kidding.
And it was just a pretty traditional light lager. It tasted great, but I'm like, I could see that era really set that kind of beer back, because it's not until the last 20 years or so that people are starting to.
People are getting to be beer snobs, though.
Yeah,
that's a good thing for craft brewers.
And that's also something. I think it was Anthony Bourdain, the late great Anthony Bourdain, who said it's just now that America is really developing its own cuisine. That for centuries we were always just borrowing from other countries, or we always kind of were looked at as being kind of lower. And one of my podcast guests that I had a few months ago is a good friend of mine who's a chef, and he pointed out, he said, it started, there was a memo written, I think in the 70s or the 80s, to the White House from a chef in California, and she said, the White House needs to have an American chef. Too much time with the French chef,
that's
because
a good point.
It sends the wrong message that we don't have, that we're just like a mixing pot for the rest of the world.
Right.
But no,
homogenous, but not
by now we
unique.
should have something of our own, and craft beer is just a great. You can't get any more local.
Yeah, that's totally true.
Even if it's inspired by kinds of beers from overseas, no, it's here.
So you were saying, just to go back to the question, the maker's role and status in society, it made me think of something. You have a resident in this town. Her name's Kristen, but she is she works at the Town of Exeter, and she's the natural resources person, and she put on an alewife festival a couple weeks ago.
Huh.
As part of that, she went to Sawbelly Brewing in Exeter and said, look, could you guys make an alewife ale? And so they said sure, and they did it. And so as part of to raise some money, she would sell like a glass for like $10 with a alewife etched on the side of it, and then you bring it to the brewery, you get a free beer that day, whatever. But that's just another example of how they try to ingratiate themselves to our community.
Yeah, and you can't find a better place. The entire state is going to be celebrating 400 years next year. Dover being the one that is going to celebrate the most because it's the oldest, continuously lived in place.
Did not know that.
And 400, Seventh Settlement was another craft beer place that actually just next door to where we are right now used to exist. And so anyway, the whole idea of incorporating local flavor, no pun intended. But that. When I traveled the country last summer, we drove all the way to the Grand Canyon and back, and we tried we tried to do as many craft beer places as possible. Kind of hard when you're driving 8 hours a day just to get there.
Got to be committed.
Right, and but again, we did buy as much as we could, for when we stayed overnight, and I just loved how they incorporated their localness.
Isn't that great?
That you can't get this anywhere else, and that's such again going back to kind of our origin place, and what better place than Exeter? It's such old, what is it, like 1630 something?
You're going to ask me and I don't know.
37?
I'm one of the transplants. I get teased about it all the time.
Well, so was the town's founder. He was exiled from, or self-exiled from Boston, and John Wheelwright. And
That's true.
He's like, I'm gonna.
That's true. That one I knew.
Make my own. So we need to make a Wheelwright ale if there's
There
one
you
that
go.
doesn't exist. And
I'll suggest it to a couple of the guys.
Not sure as a Puritan if you would have drank that or not, but that'd be even more fun. Well, thanks so much for stopping by.
Very nice to meet you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
It was a great conversation, and that's what we do at the EPS podcast. All right, take care. Thanks again.
I hope you enjoyed that summer short. Please check out the podcast on all social media outlets, including Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can also find the website www.epspodcast.club and support the show on Patreon, patreon.com/EPS Podcast. Talk to you next time.